A half a Bitcoin today is $34,842.12. My question to you is, would you pay it? If you were worth $40 million, would you pay $34,000 to find your mother? I'm gonna be honest with you, I would do it. April 6th, TMZ breaks a story that stops this community cold. New ransom notes sent directly to TMZ. This is somebody who says they know who the kidnappers are, plural, and where Nancy Guthrie is. He is persisting. He wants half a Bitcoin. And he will divulge the location. Now, if you have been following this case, you already know who Nancy Guthrie is. She is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, anchor of the Today Show. She went missing from her home in Tucson, Arizona on February 1st, 2026. And as of the moment this video was recorded, she has not been found. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is still actively investigating. The FBI is involved. Retired experts from the Bureau have been speaking publicly. And this community, your community, has been doing what it does best. Watching, tracking, demanding answers when the official channels go quiet. So when those ransom notes landed at TMZ on April 6th, the immediate response from almost everyone was predictable. Scam. Somebody chasing attention. Somebody chasing money. An opportunist who read the headlines and decided to insert themselves into the worst moment of the Guthrie family's life for personal gain. And maybe that instinct is right. Maybe the person who sent those notes knows absolutely nothing about where Nancy is. Maybe this is exactly what it looks like on the surface. But here's where it gets complicated. Here is where this story takes a turn. I want you to sit with, because a retired FBI special agent has now stepped forward with a very specific opinion about those notes. And her opinion is not what most people expected. Her name is Jennifer Coffin Daffer, former special agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She spoke on the record to Newsweek. And what she said about those ransom notes, specifically about that $34,000 Bitcoin demand, reframes the entire conversation. She is not saying the sender is credible. She is not saying Nancy is alive and being held somewhere. She is not saying that paying would guarantee answers. She is saying something far more strategic than that. She is saying pay it anyway. Asterisk. I'm going to be honest with you. I would do it. And the reason she gives is the most tactically interesting thing said publicly about this case in weeks. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why a seasoned federal investigator would recommend spending $34,000 on what she herself describes as a likely scam. Asterisk. I actually don't know if I'd pay it now, because I think it's so fake. But what isn't fake is what they want to do to this family, and that is to sadistically hurt them. Asterisk. Once you hear her full explanation, I think your perspective on those ransom notes is going to shift completely. Asterisk. We got another letter today from this person, an email saying, I know where her body is and who the kidnapper is. Give me half a Bitcoin and I'll tell you. Asterisk. Let us start with the confirmed facts. In a case like this one, with this much public speculation, this many voices, sourcing matters. On April 6, 2026, TMZ reported that new ransom notes had been sent directly to their outlet. The demand, half a Bitcoin. At the time those notes were sent, that was valued at approximately $34,000. Confirmed by TMZ. Corroborated by multiple outlets. Now here's the first detail that matters. These notes were sent to a media outlet. Not to law enforcement. Not directly to the Guthrie family. That choice alone sets off alarm bells for anyone trained in kidnapping and extortion cases. When a genuine ransom demand is issued in a real abduction, the communication almost always goes directly to the family, not to a tabloid. The goal of a legitimate ransom demand is pressure on the people who have the emotional stake in the outcome and the resources to act. Sending it to TMZ serves a different purpose entirely. It puts the demand into the public sphere. It creates attention. And attention, as investigators know, is often the actual currency being sought. Think about the psychology of that choice for a moment. If you genuinely have someone in your custody, or genuinely have actionable information about where they are, you do not go to a media outlet. You go directly to the family. You go to the person who can write the check. You go to the person who is going to be up at 3 in the morning reading every word you send because their mother is missing. Going to TMZ is a different calculation. It is about public pressure. Media coverage. The possibility that the story itself generates momentum that forces someone to act. That is not the behavior of someone operating from a position of real information. That is the behavior of someone leveraging public grief. But here is the thing. And this is the part most people miss. Even a scam is still evidence. Even a fraudulent ransom demand tells investigators something. It generates a communication that can be traced. And if the sender used a Bitcoin wallet to facilitate that demand, they left a digital signature with very specific properties. Jennifer Coffin-Daffer made this point explicitly. Her analysis did not begin with whether the notes were real. It began with what could be learned from them, regardless of their authenticity. Let us also be precise about the timeline. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st. These ransom notes arrived April 6th, more than 2 months after she disappeared. That gap is meaningful. In cases involving genuine abductions, where ransom is part of the plan, demands typically arrive early, within hours, within days. The longer someone is held without a ransom demand materializing, the more unusual the timeline becomes. A note arriving more than 60 days after a disappearance is not impossible, but it is statistically uncommon when ransom was the original motive. That gap alone was almost certainly part of how experienced observers like Coffin-Daffer arrived so quickly at the conclusion that this was likely a scam. Before we get to her full argument, and I'm going to break it down completely, let us talk about where this case actually stands right now. Because those ransom notes did not arrive in a vacuum. Law enforcement sources have discussed DNA evidence, forensic details from the scene, questions about the back door, questions about the garage, and a contractor who had access to the property. None of those threads have produced a public arrest. No one has been named as a suspect by law enforcement. The case is active. The investigation continues. And into that space of silence, into that uncertainty, someone sent ransom notes to TMZ on April 6th. Whether that person knows anything real, or is simply an opportunist, the notes exist. The Bitcoin wallet exists. The demand exists. And according to Jennifer Coffin-Daffer, that demand, if engaged, becomes a mechanism. A mechanism that works in investigators' favor, regardless of what the sender actually knows. Before we go further, let us be precise about who Jennifer Coffin-Daffer is, because her credentials matter to the weight of what she is saying. Jennifer Coffin-Daffer is a former special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She has been a recurring commentator on high-profile missing persons and criminal cases. She has spoken on the record to multiple credible outlets about this case, including Newsweek. Her analysis is expert opinion, not an official FBI statement, not a current law enforcement position, not information from inside the active investigation. She is an outside expert offering her professional read on what she is observing. That distinction matters. We are not reporting that the FBI has decided to pay the ransom. We are reporting what a credible retired agent believes should happen, and why. What Coffin-Daffer told Newsweek was this. She believes the April 6 ransom notes are likely a scam. She said that directly and on the record. She has spent a career inside the Bureau evaluating exactly these kinds of communications. Her professional instinct says the sender almost certainly does not have credible information about Nancy's whereabouts. But here is what makes her analysis extraordinary. She does not stop at "it's a scam." She keeps going. Because a scam demand sent via Bitcoin is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a different kind of investigation. Coffin-Daffer introduced a concept that some of you may have heard in the context of wiretapping. The idea of tickling the wire. In traditional surveillance, tickling the wire means generating activity on a monitored line to produce a traceable response. You are not passively waiting for the target to act. You are creating conditions that cause the target to reveal themselves. You give the other side something to react to, and the reaction is what you are actually after. This is investigative strategy, at its most sophisticated. You are not following evidence as it comes to you. You are generating the conditions under which evidence must be created. And the person on the other side of that wire doesn't know they've just been handed a rope. Asterisk, because even though the money, if it goes to Bitcoin, it's poof gone. I think this is just a mean, evil, sadistic person. But say it isn't. Say they have information. They've got to tell it to the family. And that decision-making, what they do with the money, where they try to move it, how they try to convert it, creates a trail. Asterisk. This is the part of the conversation that requires some foundational understanding of how Bitcoin actually works. Because the popular perception that cryptocurrency is untraceable, that it protects identity completely, that it is the perfect vehicle for criminal transactions, is both partially true and significantly wrong in ways that matter enormously to law enforcement. Bitcoin operates on something called a blockchain. The blockchain is a public, permanent, distributed ledger. Every single Bitcoin transaction that has ever occurred is recorded on that ledger, forever. Every transfer from wallet to wallet is logged, timestamped, and visible to anyone who knows where to look. What it obscures, to a degree, is the identity of the wallet holders. When you own a Bitcoin wallet, that wallet has an address, a string of letters and numbers. That address is public. The amounts moving in and out are public. What is not automatically public is the name of the person behind that wallet. That is the pseudonymity of Bitcoin, not anonymity, pseudonymity. And that distinction is the difference between a perfect crime and a solvable one. Think about what pseudonymity actually means in practice. It means that investigators who have a specific wallet address can see everything about how that wallet has behaved. Where Bitcoin came from before it entered that wallet. Where it went after it left. How long it sat before it moved. Whether the wallet has been used before. Whether it connects to other wallets that connect to exchanges that have been flagged previously. The blockchain is, in a sense, the most comprehensive financial surveillance ledger ever created. And unlike traditional banking records, which require subpoenas to access and may be stored in different jurisdictions, the blockchain is publicly accessible to anyone with the analytical tools to read it. Here is where law enforcement gains its critical advantage. The moment cryptocurrency needs to convert to real-world currency, dollars, euros, anything that can pay rent or buy groceries, that conversion has to pass through an exchange. And exchanges, by law in most jurisdictions, are required to verify the identity of their users. This is called Know Your Customer Compliance, KYC. Anti-money laundering regulations require exchanges to collect government-issued identification from anyone converting significant sums of cryptocurrency into fiat currency. There is no legal on-ramp from Bitcoin to spendable dollars that does not require showing your identity at some point in the process. So the path from a Bitcoin wallet to a grocery store involves a step that requires showing your face. And that step is precisely where the trail becomes traceable, precisely where the pseudonymity dissolves, precisely where an investigator with a warrant and a blockchain analysis tool becomes your worst nightmare. Coffin Daffer confirmed this on the record. Bitcoin, once it moves and is converted, becomes trackable internationally. The transaction itself is already permanently logged on the blockchain. The conversion to usable currency requires identity verification. And law enforcement has access to blockchain analysis platforms used by the FBI, the DEA, and other agencies that can follow the movement of cryptocurrency across wallets, across exchanges, and across borders, with a level of precision that most people who attempt to use Bitcoin for criminal purposes simply do not anticipate. Now apply that to the ransom demand in Nancy's case. Half a Bitcoin, $34,000. Sent to a specific wallet address the sender provided in those notes to TMZ. If that money moves into that wallet, investigators have a transaction. A timestamp. A blockchain entry that is permanent and internationally accessible. And when the sender, whether they know anything about Nancy Guthrie or not, tries to use that money, tries to convert it to something spendable, that conversion creates another traceable event. One that, depending on the exchange used and the jurisdiction involved, requires identity verification. Jennifer Coffin Daffer understood all of this when she recommended paying. She was not recommending it out of desperation. She was recommending it as a strategic move. The money becomes the trap. And the sender, by accepting it, springs that trap on themselves. Investigators do not wait for a conversion event to start building their case. From the moment a Bitcoin wallet address enters the investigative picture, blockchain analysts begin tracing backward. They look at the entire history of that wallet. Every transaction that funded it. Every address that interacted with it. They build a graph of relationships between wallets, looking for patterns that connect to known exchange accounts, known flagged addresses, known previous investigative targets. The wallet address itself, the moment it was provided in those ransom notes, is already a starting point for analysis that does not require any payment to begin. But the payment is what makes that analysis actionable. Without money moving, investigators have a wallet that received nothing. A dead end. With money moving, they have a live transaction they can follow in real time. Blockchain analysis tools used by federal investigators can monitor wallets and flag the moment funds move, the moment they are divided across multiple wallets as attempted obfuscation, the moment they approach a known exchange address. The payment does not just create a record. It creates movement. And movement in the world of blockchain forensics is information. This is why Coffin Daffer's framing of the payment as a breadcrumb, rather than a reward, is so precise. The $34,000 is not the point. The trail the $34,000 creates is the point. Asterisk, cause even though the money, if it goes to Bitcoin, it's poof gone. At least you have that piece of evidence later. Asterisk. Dash dash dash. But someone is going to ask the fair question. And it deserves a straight answer. If the sender does not actually know where Nancy is, then even catching them doesn't help find Nancy. Coffin-Daffer's argument accounts for this. It operates on two separate tracks simultaneously, and both tracks have independent value. Track 1. If the sender does have credible information, if they somehow know something real about Nancy's situation, then engaging with the demand opens a communication channel. It creates the possibility of information exchange. Asterisk. Not that I think it's true, because I think this is just a mean, evil, sadistic person, but say it isn't. Say they have information. They've got to tell it to the family, right? Can you imagine if they tell a family that? Most sophisticated investigative approaches to ransom demands involve using the payment as the first move in a negotiation designed to extract location information before, during, or through the payment process. Investigators who engage with extortionists in this context are not passive. They are using every interaction to build a profile, communication patterns, message origins, what they might actually know. Track 2, and this is the one Coffin-Daffer emphasizes. If the sender is a scammer who knows nothing, then catching them still accomplishes something real. It removes an extortionist from the street. It stops them from preying on another grieving family in another high-profile case. It produces an arrest, a prosecution, a criminal record, and it does all of that for $34,000. Compare that to the cost of a lengthy criminal investigation. Compare it to the FBI resources required to identify, locate, and prosecute an extortionist through conventional means without the benefit of a traceable financial transaction. The math starts to look different when you frame the payment not as a ransom, but as an investigative expenditure. There is also a dimension to this that goes beyond the individual case. High-profile missing persons cases regularly attract bad actors. People who insert themselves with false tips, false confessions, false ransom demands, because the media attention creates perverse incentives. Every resource law enforcement spends, chasing false leads, is a resource not spent on legitimate investigative threads. And every fraudulent ransom demand that goes unanswered and unprosecuted teaches opportunists that this is a viable play. We have seen this pattern in other cases. When a case reaches saturation-level media coverage, when the name becomes a household name, when the family is publicly known, when the press cycle is self-sustaining, the volume of fraudulent claims investigators must wade through increases dramatically. Coffin-Daffer's recommendation, in this context, is not just about Nancy's case. It is about a principle. If you can catch and prosecute one extortionist through their own cryptocurrency trail, you have demonstrated to every other opportunist watching from the sidelines that this is not a safe play. You have created deterrence. And deterrence in an environment where high-profile cases are being exploited with increasing frequency has real value. Not just for this investigation, but for every family that will go through something like this in the future. Catching and prosecuting one extortionist changes the calculus for others who might be watching. It sends a message. The trail you think you have hidden is actually the most permanent thing you have ever created. I told you at the beginning of this video that I was going to show you the most strategically interesting thing said publicly about this case in weeks. Here it is. The full quote from Jennifer Coffin-Daffer as published by Newsweek, on the record, under her name. Asterisk. Once it's gone, it's going to be gone. But I would want that last breadcrumb. I think it would be worth it to me. Minimally, you might be able to get this extortionist off the street. For $34,000, that's a cheap price. Asterisk. Read that carefully, because every word in that statement is doing something specific. Once it's gone, it's going to be gone. That is Coffin-Daffer acknowledging the risk. She is not pretending that paying is without cost. $34,000 transferred via Bitcoin is not easily recovered. She knows that. She is stating it plainly. She is not selling this as a no-risk play. She is presenting it as a calculated risk, with a specific, expected return. But I would want that last breadcrumb. This is the strategic center of her entire argument. Not the destination, the trail marker. The thing that tells you which direction to look next. She is not saying $34,000 buys answers about Nancy. She is saying it buys a traceable digital event that can be followed. One more entry in the blockchain. One more transaction that investigators can map, analyze, and follow to its conversion point. In an investigation that has been frustratingly short on new traceable events, that breadcrumb has real value. I think it would be worth it to me. She is personalizing it, saying that if this were her investigation, this is the call she would make. That is a significant statement from someone with her background. She is not speaking hypothetically. She is saying, In my professional judgment as someone who has worked federal investigations and evaluated exactly these kinds of decisions under real pressure, this is what I would do. Minimally, you might be able to get this extortionist off the street. The word minimally is everything. She is setting a floor, not a ceiling. The floor, the absolute worst-case outcome of paying, is still an arrest. Still a criminal removed from the pool of people who prey on vulnerable families. Still a prosecution, still a deterrent. That is the minimum return on the investment. Any outcome above that minimum, any actual information about Nancy, any lead that moves the investigation forward, is a bonus. For $34,000, that's a cheap price. This is the cost-benefit analysis compressed into a single sentence. $34,000 to potentially identify, locate, and arrest a criminal extortionist. $34,000 to generate a blockchain breadcrumb that investigators can follow internationally. $34,000 that, even if it produces nothing about Nancy's location, produces a prosecutable offense and a meaningful deterrent. Coffin-Daffer is not saying pay the ransom because the ransom is legitimate. She is saying use the ransom demand as a law enforcement mechanism. Reframe the payment, not as submission to extortion, but as the activation of a trap. And in doing so, she is drawing on a principle that experienced investigators have used for decades. That the best way to catch someone who thinks they are untouchable is to give them something they want and then watch what they do with it. Now let us zoom out. Because the ransom notes and Coffin-Daffer's response to them are not happening in isolation. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has been the lead agency on this case since February 1st. Sheriff Chris Nanos has spoken publicly. Brian Anton of News Nation has been on this story consistently, reporting from Tucson, tracking the investigative threads as they develop. The FBI has been involved throughout. Multiple retired federal agents have offered public analysis. Coffin-Daffer, as well as Brad Garrett, Steve Moore, Moran O'Connell, Jason Peck, and Tracy Walder. C.C. Moore, the forensic genealogist from Parabon Nanolabs, has been mentioned in connection with DNA evidence that has reportedly been collected and processed. The collection of biological material signals that investigators have something to work with forensically. And forensic genealogy, when it has material to work with, has a track record of producing identifications in cases that appeared to be at dead ends. Worth pausing on what the combined weight of that expert involvement tells us. When retired FBI agents, forensic genealogists, and active investigators are all engaged with a single missing persons case, commenting publicly, being sought out by major media outlets. It signals that this case has not faded internally, the way some cases do after the initial press cycle ends. This is not a case that has been quietly shelved. It is a case that is being actively worked by people who know what they are doing. The contractor angle has been an active thread in public reporting. The question of who had access to the property, who came and went, what their movements looked like before and around February 1st, has been examined carefully. Forensic details from the scene, the back door, the garage, the flower pot. None of those threads have produced a public arrest. No one has been named as a suspect by law enforcement. And now, layered on top of all of this active investigative work, ransom notes. April 6th. TMZ. What Coffin-Daffer's analysis adds to this picture is a framework for thinking about those notes that moves beyond the simple binary of real or scam. In her framing, the authenticity of the notes is almost secondary to what can be extracted from them. The notes exist, the Bitcoin demand exists, the wallet address exists, and every one of those things is a potential investigative lever if someone makes the decision to engage. Whether law enforcement, the FBI, or the Guthrie family has made any decision about those notes is not publicly confirmed as of the time this video was produced. That is an important sourcing note. We are not reporting that anyone has decided to pay. We are not reporting that anyone has decided not to pay. We are reporting that a credible former federal agent, speaking on the record to Newsweek, has offered a specific and strategically coherent argument for why engaging with the demand could produce law enforcement value, regardless of whether the sender is credible. The decision about whether to act on that argument belongs to people who have information we do not have. People inside the investigation with access to the full forensic picture. People who know things about this case that have not entered the public record. And possibly the Guthrie family themselves, who are living in a reality that we are only observing from a distance. In investigations where the trail goes cold, where weeks become months without a public breakthrough, the appearance of any new traceable thread, even one generated by an opportunist, is not automatically dismissed by experienced investigators. Sometimes the side door leads somewhere. Sometimes the person who shows up uninvited turns out to be connected to something real. Not because they know what they say they know, but because engaging with them produces information that standing aside never would have. The ransom notes may be nothing. The sender may be a person who read a TMZ headline and decided to roll the dice on someone else's grief. But the Bitcoin trail they created, by making that demand, by establishing a wallet address, by putting that address into a communication sent to a major media outlet, is real. And real trails, in the hands of investigators with the right tools, have a way of going somewhere. Here's what I want to say directly to the people who have been watching this case from the beginning. To the people who have been following every development, sharing every update, keeping Nancy's name alive in conversation, even when the official channels go quiet and the weeks start to feel long. This case is still active. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Her family is still living in the hardest possible moment. And the investigative work, the real investigative work, is happening in places we cannot see, with information we do not have access to, at a pace that does not always match the urgency we feel watching from the outside. There is something I want to name directly about what this community has meant to this case. Online communities around high-profile investigations have historically played a meaningful role, not by solving cases single-handedly, but by generating the sustained public attention that keeps law enforcement resourced and accountable. Cases that fall out of the public eye tend to receive fewer investigative resources. Cases that stay in front of the public, through continued coverage, through engagement, through people who keep asking questions, tend to move. The people watching, sharing, and discussing this case are not just spectators. They are part of the mechanism that keeps this investigation a priority. If this video has brought you value, if it shifted your perspective, added context you didn't have before, or helped you understand the investigative mechanics behind the Bitcoin decision, this is a good moment to subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit that button. Turn on the notification bell, because every time something new surfaces in this case, every time another expert speaks on the record, every time a new angle opens up, we are going to be here breaking it down, sourced, analyzed, delivered in a way that respects both the facts and the gravity of what Nancy Guthrie's family is living through. And we are not going anywhere. Community attention, to be valuable, has to be accurate. It has to be disciplined. The same energy that can help a case can also hurt it if it gets ahead of the evidence. False suspects named publicly. Private individuals whose information gets spread across comment sections. Theories that sound compelling but are built on unverified claims. These things create noise that investigators then have to cut through. And that noise costs time and resources that belong to the actual investigation. So the standard we hold ourselves to here is not just about being right. It is about being useful. Adding signal, not noise. The ransom notes that arrived on April 6th are one data point in an investigation that has many. Coffin Daffer's recommendation is one expert voice among several that have weighed in publicly. The FBI's actual strategy, whatever it is not something we have confirmed visibility into from the outside. What we can do, what this community does well, is stay informed, stay analytical, and stay rigorous about the difference between what is confirmed and what is speculation. Jennifer Coffin Daffer's argument for paying the Bitcoin is grounded in investigative strategy, not hope. It is not an emotional argument. It is not a plea from someone who has run out of options. It is a calculated, forensically literate recommendation from someone who spent a career inside the Bureau making exactly these kinds of calls. And whether anyone acts on it or not, understanding why a former FBI agent would look at a $34,000 ransom note from a likely scammer and say, "This is still worth engaging," tells you something important about how high-stakes investigations actually work. Where every thread, even the ones that look like dead ends, is a potential vector. Where the money you send to catch a scammer might be the best $34,000 ever spent on a case that needs every advantage it can get. Nancy Guthrie deserves every advantage. Her family deserves every advantage. And this community deserves to understand every angle, including the ones that require slowing down and thinking like an investigator instead of reacting like a headline. Here is the bottom line on what Coffin Daffer is actually saying, stated as plainly as possible. She is not advocating for capitulation to extortion. She is not expressing hope that the sender has real information. She is saying there is a tool available to investigators right now, embedded in the mechanics of this ransom demand, that could accomplish something real. Arrest, prosecution, deterrence. For a relatively modest sum. And choosing not to use that tool because the demand looks like a scam is, in her professional view, a mistake. Because the thing about the blockchain is that it does not wait. Wallets can be abandoned. Funds can be moved preemptively. The window in which paying generates a traceable event is not unlimited. And once that window closes, whatever investigative opportunity existed in those ransom notes closes with it. That is what, once it's gone, it's going to be gone, actually means. It is not just about the money. It is about the moment. And Coffin Daffer is saying the moment is worth $34,000. That is what we are going to keep doing here. Tracking this case, bringing you the analysis, breaking down the expert voices, watching the threads, every time something new surfaces. Every time another expert speaks on the record.